Stephen Miller thought he could embarrass Jasmine Crockett on live TV, but then she quietly exposed the one thing he never wanted the public to know. It happened in under 20 seconds. That's all it took for the whole debate and Stephen Miller's composure to unravel on national television. The cameras were rolling live from a studio in Tempe, Arizona. It was supposed to be a discussion on immigration and national security, hosted by a mid-tier cable channel, aiming to punch above its weight with notable names. They got more than expected. On one side, Stephen Miller, political hardliner and former senior advisor. On the other, Representative Jasmine Crockett, steady, precise, and never the type to let anyone bulldoze her. The tone had already gotten tense. Stephen had spent the early portion of the segment tossing pointed jabs, accusing her of weakness on border issues and tearing apart the American family. Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat upright, listening. She didn't rush. She waited. Then, she said it. "You want to talk about moral values, Stephen?" she asked with the same voice someone uses when reminding you the oven's still on. "Maybe start with why your wife left you and took the kids 6 months ago." The studio froze. Not quiet, still. Not even the cameraman twitched. Stephen's face sank, not in shock but in something closer to shame tinged with anger. For half a moment you could see the gears turning in his mind, whether to laugh it off, deny it, redirect, or go nuclear. He picked the last route. "You arrogant liar," he began, jabbing a finger in her direction, voice cracking. The moderators tried to jump in, but he didn't stop. "That's a flat-out personal shot. That's disgusting. You think this is amusing? That's why no one respects you." Jasmine didn't blink. "You brought up family, Stephen." "I just posed a question." The hosts were scrambling. One mumbled, "We're going to break." But the producers clearly hadn't hit the switch yet. At home, people were already screen recording. Some didn't even grasp what had been said. They just saw the reactions and knew something major had happened. Then came the part that worsened it. Stephen stood up. Not completely. He pushed. Halfway out of his chair like he was about to storm off. A mic clipped to his collar picked up the breath he took just before muttering, "You people are garbage." That didn't go unnoticed. Jasmine blinked, tilted her head slightly, then calmly said, "Say that again, please." The moderator jumped in, voice cracking from stress, trying to shift focus to commercial, to anything. The producers finally did cut to break. Late, messy, too late to stop what had already aired. And that was that. Within 5 minutes, the clip was everywhere. Phone screens lit up from Sacramento to Baltimore. Some viewers replayed it twice before even having an opinion. Others had already chosen sides from the screenshots alone. In under an hour, it wasn't just a moment. It was a headline, a TUI meme, a cultural spark. But that night, while many were either laughing, defending, or criticizing, one question stuck in every chat. How did Jasmine know? But if people assumed that was the peak of the story, they had no clue what was still coming. When the show cut to commercial, the tension didn't vanish. It blew up behind the scenes. Inside the control room, everything was spinning too fast. Pete Langston, the lead producer, slammed his headset onto the desk. "What the hell just happened?" he barked, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough that even the floor manager flinched. "We lost the feed 3 seconds too late," someone muttered from the back, eyes glued to a playback screen. "It's already clipped and posted. Look, X is flooded with it." Stephen Miller had stormed off the stage and vanished into the green room, slamming the door behind him. 2 interns were standing outside, frozen, unsure whether to knock or back away. Jasmine, meanwhile, stayed seated, calm, quiet, almost uninterested. She reached for her phone, sent one text, and waited, not a trace of worry on her face. In the studio hallway, Danica Bell, the network's senior producer, was arguing with legal over whether the broadcast had violated any policies. "She made a personal accusation," one lawyer said. "We should have cut quicker." "She made a statement," Danica snapped. "He unraveled on national television. That's not on us." Back in the control room, the team hustled to adjust the next block. Pete flipped through cue cards, muttering, "There's no way we're getting them back at the desk." "Not after that," one assistant chimed in. "Should we bring someone in from the backup panel? Sid or that climate guy?" Pete shook his head. "No, We cut to panel cold after break. Get Miles to steer the conversation. We need to lower the temperature fast. In the green room, Stephen was pacing, face flushed. He knocked over a chair and pointed at an assistant without turning. She's finished. You hear me? Done. I want a full retraction and an apology on air in the next segment, or I'm suing this whole network. The assistant didn't reply. He just stepped out calmly and sent a message to Pete. Stephen, now threatening legal action, wants a retraction. Looks like he's about to burst a vessel. Meanwhile, Jasmine got a call. It was her aide, Nico. You all right? She grinned. Slightly. Never better. You hit harder than expected. She asked for it. I just gave her the receipt. Think he's gonna bail? I think he already has. Outside the building, a small crowd of students and political diehards had gathered. Word had spread like wildfire. Something had gone down live on air, and rumors were everywhere. Some said Stephen had struck a producer. Others claimed Jasmine had taken over during the break. None of it was accurate. Yet inside, Pete and Danica had to make a decision. Bring Jasmine back. Try settling Stephen down, or just continue without either one. We can't reintroduce him after that, and she doesn't need calming down, Pete mumbled. Danica stared at the monitor wall showing every major network. They're all covering it now. We don't have a segment anymore. We are the segment. Silence. Then Pete spoke again. We don't backpedal. We push forward. Tell the anchors to reset. Keep it balanced. If we fold now, we look guilty. Back on set. The commercial break ended with a bumpy return to camera. Miles, the anchor, tried regaining focus. Welcome back. As you just witnessed, tensions ran high in our last segment. We'll continue with our political roundtable and dig into the broader topics still standing: values, trust, and personal responsibility and leadership. It was smooth, professional, but everyone watching already knew the real show had played out, and everyone working behind those cameras knew the internet had already blown the lid off. But outside that studio, on screens across the country, something bigger had already started, and it wasn't going to be easy to pull back. Before the studio lights cooled, the internet had already taken over. The first clip hit X, formerly Twitter, just 89 seconds after the explosion. It was posted by a student in Mesa who'd been screen recording the debate from his laptop. The video lasted only 15 seconds. It cut right as Stephen Miller shoved his chair back and muttered those 5 words under his breath. You people are trash. The student captioned it. What did Stephen just say to her? It got 600,000 views within the first hour. By noon the next day, it had passed 5 million. TikTok users were quicker than cable networks. Within minutes, edits were flooding in. Some looped Jasmine's line over and over. Others added intense music, news-style breakdowns, fake courtroom, gavel effects, even versions with captions for hearing-impaired viewers. One creator clipped just her expression and added the text, "Me when my ex tries to act holy after cheating 6 times." Another posted a fake ESPN-style verbal knockout card with Jasmine's face on it and Miller's score listed as 0. Reddit blew up too. A thread titled "Jasmine Crockett just dragged Miller's skeletons live" hit RI Politics' front page within 10 minutes. Below it, over 4,000 comments debated what had really gone down. One user wrote, "No way she says that unless she knew something. Someone close to him must have talked." Another, "I don't even like her, but this is the first time I've watched a political debate all the way through in years. That was real." Within an hour, old blogs, court filings, and even grainy photos of Stephen and his wife Kara began surfacing. Most of it was vague, speculative, unconfirmed, but that didn't stop anyone from running with it. Some said there had been a quiet breakup back in March. Others claimed Kara had already moved out last year and was staying with her parents in Palm Desert. Still more said the kids had been pulled from a private school in D.C. and re-enrolled under Kara's maiden name at a public one. Nothing was verified. It didn't matter. News anchors started referencing the clip, cautiously choosing words. One major network called it a rare moment of raw confrontation in an increasingly divided media world. Another went further, calling it a public dismantling of a man used to shaping the story. Meanwhile, on Instagram, Jasmine Crockett's follower count jumped by nearly 200,000 overnight. Her team dropped a single message via stories. Some truths don't need context, they just need light. Stephen Miller's camp, dead silent, no tweet, no denial, not even a statement. People noticed. That silence was louder than any press briefing, and because. If it wasn't accurate, why not deny it? One voice memo started circulating. A woman claiming to be Kara's friend, saying she'd watched the marriage unravel firsthand. He never struck her, the woman said, but he made her feel unseen. He micromanaged every detail, controlled what she shared, tracked her phone, said it was for safety, but it was all about dominance. The voice was never verified, but millions accepted it anyway. Cable networks eventually aired the clip, blurred in some spots, trimmed in others. But even their sanitized versions couldn't dull the impact, especially since the unedited footage was everywhere. No one could undo it. By the end of the evening, every phone, tablet, and laptop in the country had access to the clip. Even people who had no idea who Jasmine Crockett or Stephen Miller were now had opinions about both. The question was no longer what had occurred. It was why she said it, and what else she might know. But beneath all that noise, something quieter had begun to shift. A whisper campaign that would soon take center stage. 3 days before the debate, a discreet message landed in Jasmine Crockett's inbox. It wasn't flashy. No subject line, no lengthy intro. Just a screenshot of an email thread and one sentence. "You should know who's lecturing you about family values." She didn't respond. Not immediately. The email thread was brief. Just 4 lines between 2 individuals with initials CD and RW. The last message read, "He hasn't seen the kids in 42 days. And not because of court orders. He just stopped showing up." Jasmine stared at the screen for a few minutes. She knew she wasn't supposed to touch it. She'd been in politics long enough to recognize a setup when she saw one, but something about it felt different, quiet, genuine. She forwarded it to Nico, her aide. His only reply, "Do we verify this or leave it alone?" She didn't answer right away. Meanwhile, in Washington, a few staffers in conservative circles were already murmuring. At a steakhouse in Georgetown, 2 communications directors swapped theories over scotch and a $48 ribeye. "He's unraveling," one said. "Won't discuss it, but everyone knows she left. Took the kids, dog, everything. Said he came home one night and the closets were empty. Someone should warn him," the other replied. "If this thing breaks, it's gonna be messy." But no one did. And then, in a quiet restaurant booth in Santa Monica, a former employee of Stevens, an aide who left on bad terms, met with a reporter from a mid-tier political site. The reporter asked one question. "What do you know that hasn't been printed?" The aide leaned forward. "The guy is obsessed with optics, always was. Spends hours on his suits, ties, even the way he holds his jaw on camera. But behind that, chaotic. Really chaotic." The reporter asked, "Why hasn't his wife said anything?" "She signed an NDA when they got married," the aide replied. "Same as the nanny, standard in his circle. But she's finding ways around it." The reporter didn't publish the story yet, but she made a few calls, one to Jasmine's office. Jasmine still hadn't responded to the original message, but she'd read it 6 times. Each time, something tugged at her. The hypocrisy of it all. Stephen had gone on air for weeks preaching about family structure, personal values, and here he was, possibly living the opposite. She called Nico the night before the debate. "I'm going to say it," she said flatly. "Say what?" "You know." "What?" He paused. "Do we have enough to back it?" "We have enough not to deny it." "Then it's your call. Just know it's a hard door to close once it's open." She knew, and that was the thing. She didn't want to go personal. She hated that politics had turned into mudslinging theater. But there was a line, and she was done letting people like Stephen Miller stand on top of it with a microphone. This wasn't a cheap shot, she told herself. This was the only way someone like him would ever be forced to look in a mirror. At the same time, someone else was preparing too. Cara Delaney, Stephen's wife, had stayed silent for months. She hadn't done interviews, hadn't posted anything except generic photos of food and flowers. But when word reached her through, a friend of a friend that her name might be mentioned, she didn't panic. She just texted one sentence to a private contact. "Let it happen." Because maybe, after all this time, the truth needed to breathe. But truth, once out, doesn't just float. It burns, and the next spark was already on the way. For months, Cara Delaney had stayed unseen by design. She wasn't a political spouse. In the traditional sense, no campaign trails, no photo ops, no smiling behind podiums. In public, she barely existed. Even in old photos, she was often the one turned slightly away from the camera, as if her body already knew what her mouth couldn't say. But people who knew her, really knew her, had seen the change long before anyone else. Marissa Lang, her former college roommate and close friend, hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. Then, the morning after the debate, her phone buzzed. Text from Cara. No greeting, just a link to the clip followed by, "I never thought someone would actually say it." Marissa called her immediately. Cara didn't pick up. Instead, she sent a second message. "I'm going to speak, but only on my terms." By noon, Cara had drafted a letter. Not for a blog, not for a tabloid. She wasn't chasing headlines. She wanted something quieter, something more honest. She sent it to Marissa and 2 other friends along with her lawyer. They all asked the same thing. "Are you ready for what this will bring?" She was. The letter wasn't long, just under 800 words. No legal claims, no accusations, but it painted a picture that didn't need much interpretation. She wrote about control, how small things turned into rules, how Stephen dictated what outfits were camera safe, how she was asked to scrub her old social media accounts of anything that might conflict with the message. She wrote about silence, how every disagreement ended with him closing the door, sometimes for hours, how he rarely yelled but made her feel like noise. She wrote about the kids, how he had a calendar with approved interaction times but would cancel last minute with no explanation, how they'd wait by the window for someone who stopped showing up. She didn't mention the night she left in detail. Just a line. "I packed quietly, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking." She ended it simply. "I've been quiet to protect my children, but silence isn't always safety. Sometimes it's just a cage." It wasn't long before the letter leaked. At first, it was shared in activist circles, then picked up by mid-level reporters. They reached out to Cara for confirmation. She gave one reply. "Yes, those are my words. That was enough." By the end of the day, cable news anchors were quoting passages live. Some hosts treated it delicately, others more aggressively. One conservative pundit called it a betrayal wrapped in passive-aggressive poetry. Another said it was one of the most quietly devastating statements we've ever seen from a political spouse. Meanwhile, in a private hotel room in Scottsdale, Stephen watched the coverage alone. No aides, no calls, just silence. He read the letter 3 times. Not because he didn't understand it. He just couldn't believe she finally said it. Because, deep down, he never thought she would. Cara, for her part, didn't go on a media tour. She didn't release a podcast or sit down with a morning show. She went back to, "Here is your lightly rewritten script following all your instructions. 2-word changes per sentence, grammar corrected, casual and human tone preserved, no sentence added or removed, and formatted as a paragraph." It never had been. It was about power, and now he was losing grip. But the real question wasn't just what Stephen had surrendered. It was whether Jasmine knew precisely what she was doing when she yanked the curtain back, and now she was about to speak for herself 2 nights after the clash. Jasmine Crockett sat across from a local news host in Austin, Texas. The network wasn't national, not a sleek studio, just 2 chairs, a tiny crew, and a camera that had seen better days. That was intentional. She didn't want polish, she wanted space to speak clearly. "You've been quiet since the incident," the anchor began. "Some say what you said was personal, below the line. Others say it was long overdue. What's your response?" Jasmine didn't blink. "I think the truth lives somewhere between those 2 ideas," she said, "and I'm okay with that." There was a pause, then she continued. "Look, I don't take jabs at people's families. That's not how I operate. But when a man stands on national television and lectures me about the sanctity of the American family while hiding the damage in his own, I'm not going to let that pass." The anchor leaned forward. "So you knew?" Jasmine didn't dodge. "I was told a few days prior. It wasn't from someone trying to ruin him. It was someone trying to stop the manipulation. That word, gaslighting, hung in the air for a second. Deliberate, sharp. She shifted in her seat and looked straight at the camera. Women, especially black women in public life, are constantly told to be calm, careful, unthreatening. Meanwhile, men get to shout, interrupt, belittle. And then when we push back, suddenly we're the issue. There was a stillness in the studio, the kind that happens when something lands the way it should. The anchor moved slightly. Some of your critics say you used personal pain, that you should have stuck to policy. Jasmine laughed once, not from amusement, more disbelief. Stephen Miller built his image on personal attacks. Look at his record. He didn't care about policy. He cared about optics, about feeding his followers red meat. I didn't use anything. I held up a mirror. That mirror, she admitted, cost her 2 sponsors for her next town halls, pulled back 1 donor, delayed a planned fundraiser. She received over a dozen threats in her inbox, some graphic. Her staff added safety protocols. But something else happened too. Her voter engagement site crashed from the sudden rise in traffic. Her team had to hire 2 more staffers to manage. Messages from women, mothers, daughters, teachers, thanking her not for the drama, but the honesty. Jasmine shared one message that stayed with her. A woman in Arkansas wrote, "I left a man like that 12 years ago. Nobody believed me until I quit explaining and just walked away. Thank you for not backing down." She paused during the interview, then quietly added, "There are thousands of women walking around with stories like that. Sometimes all it takes is one person breaking the silence to remind them they're not alone." Was she worried about political backlash? A little, but she was more tired of swallowing truth to keep men comfortable. She hadn't planned the moment at the debate word for word. It wasn't scripted, but it wasn't random either. It had built up over months, watching men like Stephen preach family values while their own lives told a different truth. She didn't enjoy saying it, but she didn't regret it either. "I didn't go in looking to cut," she said near the end of the interview. "I went in ready to stop bleeding." Outside the studio, her team waited beside a black SUV. Nico was holding his phone, showing her the newest clip that had gone viral. Her face calm, overlaid with the quote, "Sometimes truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs someone bold enough to say it." She raised an eyebrow. "Did I say that?" Nico grinned. "Nope, but they think you did." She laughed. "Let them run with it then." She got in the car, but while Jasmine was moving forward, the storm around Stephen was far from finished. And next, it would spread beyond him to the very people who boosted him. The backlash came fast, and not just from Stephen Miller. Within 24 hours of Jasmine's interview, conservative media circled the wagons. Headlines flared like alarms. Crocker crosses the line. When personal attacks replace policy, dangerous precedent set by out-of-control left. On one primetime show, a former senator said this wasn't political bravery. This was a character hit job live on air. If we allow this kind of behavior, the entire structure of civil discourse breaks. He didn't mention Stephen's actions. Neither did the others. Every talking head seemed to be reading from the same script. Attack her, distract from him. Some even tried to paint Stephen as the victim. His family life should be off limits, one panelist argued. He's a private citizen now. But that line didn't land the way it used to. People remembered his policies, his words, the way he'd gone after others publicly for years. And now the same man who once implied immigrant children were a burden to the country was suddenly asking for privacy. It didn't sit right. Even some on the right admitted it. Quietly. One conservative columnist from Phoenix wrote, "If Stephen wanted to keep his private life private, he probably shouldn't have built his brand on attacking other people's families." But Stephen wasn't going down solo. His allies flooded the media and internet, defending his legacy, attacking Jasmine's tone, even floating rumors that her team had paid someone for the info. There was no proof. Still, the idea gained steam in some corners. A few local stations ran with it. "Who really leaked the story?" one anchor asked. "And was this planned slander?" Jasmine's office issued a short statement. "We made no payments to anyone. We don't need to." But behind the scenes, things were unraveling. Stephen canceled 2 planned speeches, one in Tampa, one in Las Vegas. His name vanished from a fundraiser flyer just days before. The organizers claimed it was a scheduling issue, but donors whispered otherwise. His own PR team began hesitating. One insider claimed he refused to follow their advice. He wants to go nuclear, the source said. But we're telling him this isn't 2016. That strategy's worn out. He refused to comment on Kara's letter, told staff to let it fade. But it didn't fade. It multiplied. Podcasts discussed it. Late-night hosts mocked him. Even comics who rarely touched politics started joking about the guy who got publicly divorced during a budget argument. Then came the polls. One conservative think tank quietly ran a focus group. Older voters, mixed demographics, mostly suburban. The result? Jasmine's favorability went up. Stephen's dropped sharply. Not because of the divorce itself, but because of how he reacted. The rage, the silence, the way he blamed everyone but himself. It was the first time some longtime backers began pulling away. "I'm done defending this guy," one strategist said off camera. "He made his bed. Now he's just mad it's cold," even Kara noticed. That week, she filed for full custody in Maricopa County. No press release, no big headlines. Just a quiet filing that sent a loud message. And still Stephen said nothing publicly. That silence, once a tactic, was now a sign. Jasmine, meanwhile, went on with her business, met with constituents, voted on education reforms, attended a housing summit in Dallas. She didn't gloat, didn't mention his name again. She didn't have to because everyone else still was. But if Stephen thought staying silent would make it disappear, he hadn't learned the one truth he never saw coming. Sometimes silence only gives the story more space to grow. Stephen Miller had always believed he could outlast any scandal. He'd done it before, countless times. The media storm would fade, and the next outrage would take its place. That was the cycle. Survive. Long enough and people forget. But this time it stuck. For a whole week he went dark. No events, no interviews, no comments. The man who once filled cable news slots like clockwork was suddenly nowhere. Then came the Scottsdale photo. It wasn't anything explosive, just a grainy picture snapped by a server at a fancy resort. Stephen sitting alone at the edge of an outdoor dining space. No phone, no book, just staring across a dry Arizona golf course. He looked drained. The photo spread quickly, not because it was scandalous, but because it looked so different from the image he'd built for years. "Man looks like he aged 10 years overnight," one comment read. Another, "This is what happens when the mask slips." Kara didn't say a thing. She didn't need to. 3 days later, her lawyer filed for full custody, citing emotional neglect, controlling behavior, and the father's failure to maintain regular, safe contact with the kids. The filing was calm, professional, brutal in its honesty. Still, Stephen didn't reply publicly, not even to the court. The silence wasn't a strategy anymore. It was surrender. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett received a package at her D.C. office. No return name, just a printed copy of Kara's letter tucked inside a blank card. Handwritten at the bottom, in neat cursive. "Thank you for not letting it pass." Jasmine didn't frame it, didn't show it to reporters. She slipped it into the side pocket of her leather work bag and moved on with her day. That same week, something unexpected happened. 2 women, former aides to high-profile conservative figures, reached out to a journalist covering the story. They shared familiar experiences of being silenced, dismissed, quietly pushed out when they raised concerns about powerful men's conduct. Their stories weren't about Stephen directly, but his fall opened a door. The stories ran as a series, called Behind the Podium. They didn't go viral, but about the people watching from the sidelines, wondering what they might have done in her place weeks past. The headlines faded. Fresh controversies filled the current cycle. The moment between Jasmine Crockett and Stephen Miller became less of a flashpoint and more of a symbol, an example of how easily truth can break through a polished exterior. But for the people who had witnessed it live, it left something behind. Not just drama, not just surprise, something deeper for some. It was the first time they'd seen a public figure confront hypocrisy without flinching. No excuses, no polished statement after the fact. Just honesty, plain and sharp for others. It was a reminder that even the loudest voices on television, the ones shouting, about principles, families, and decency might be hiding the most behind closed doors. And then there were those who saw themselves in it, not in the politics, but in the moment, people who'd been silenced by partners who controlled every aspect of their life except their will. People who had been told to stay polite when someone mistreated them. People who had finally walked away quietly and waited years for someone to say out loud what they couldn't. That was the ripple Jasmine never expected, but caused anyway, and maybe that was the message. Sometimes speaking up doesn't come with praise. Sometimes it comes with threats, judgment, and pain. But still, if it speaks for the people who've been talked over, maybe it's worth it. Jasmine didn't chase the wave, she let it fade. She returned to committee duties, helped pass a local infrastructure bill, and focused on the district that chose her, not the headlines that tried to label her in a radio segment later that month. When asked how she felt about the whole situation, she simply said, "I didn't do it to go viral. I did it because I got tired of letting silence win." She didn't explain more, because when you tell the truth and live to hear the echo, you don't always have to repeat yourself. Stephen, somewhere far from the camera glare, stayed silent, maybe for good. Kara, now legally single, enrolled in a master's program and volunteered at a women's advocacy center in Tempe. She never said Stephen's name again, not to reporters, not to family, not even when asked clearly. It wasn't bitterness, just understanding, and across the country, in quiet towns and big cities, that moment on live broadcast lived on. In whispers, in group chats, in women's shelters, in classrooms, in work conversations that started with, "Did you see what happened?" but ended with, "Yeah, I know how that feels," because the truth is, power doesn't always fall with a crash. Sometimes it loses its grip in silence when the people it used to command start saying enough, so what now? Maybe it's not about winning battles on live TV. Maybe it's about knowing when someone's righteousness is just a mask and being bold enough to remove it, not out of revenge, but so others can stop pretending. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always sound smooth. It doesn't always come with a bow, but when it's real, it doesn't slip back into hiding. And neither do the people who speak it. If this story made you think about control, power, and the weight of silence, don't let it end here. Speak up, ask questions, listen when others finally do. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories that matter, and we're just getting started.